Thank you to each of you for your comments, your testimony this morning. Greatly appreciated. You know, as I sit here listening, you mentioned the new energy reality. We have just come so far. You know, I've been on this, privileged to be on this committee now for 15 years. And to think how this country has changed in terms of our position as an energy supplier, not only to meet our needs, but to be in the position, in that role, where others can actually look to us. It wasn't too many years ago, we were working the initiative to remove the 40-year policy that prohibited oil exports outside of the state of Alaska and our opportunity to export oil. We were basically sitting in the back seat. And it's been interesting because when that debate was going on, there was a great deal of discussion about, well, if we're allowed to move forward with oil exports, the price of oil is going to go sky high. The question I'd like to start off with today, Mr. Slocum, you have shared a view with the committee that is perhaps not endorsed by the rest of the panel here in stating the position that domestic natural gas prices will double because of exports. And I don't know who wants to jump in here on this, but I would appreciate a rebuttal or a response to that. Obviously, there's been discussion here about the national interest finding that has to, at this point in time, moves forward to make sure that the determination to allow for additional exports does not unduly impact prices. So, Assistant Secretary, would you like to speak to this as an issue that is under consideration today?
Sure, I'd be happy to, and thank you. I think there's several facets here that we need to consider. And let me start with the first one, which is the technology. We're still climbing the learning curve on producing both oil and natural gas from unconventional resources, often called shale plays. Mm-hmm. And as we climb that learning curve, as the producers understand how to get more of the resource out of a frac zone, we're going to make some pretty significant strides as we move forward on that, as we climb the learning curve. The second thing that the department is doing, the Fossil Energy Office, and Senator Cantwell raised the issue of supercomputers or high-performance computing. We have about a decade worth of data that we have amassed from the producing community in unconventional oil and gas. And that data, combined with the department's high-performance computing capability at our national labs, combined with physics-based modeling, we believe that we're going to be able to increase production. So we're going to be able to go beyond what they currently produce, which is only about 10%, by the way, within the frac zone. So that's one point. The second point is that EIA projects that we're going to be at 110 billion cubic feet per day by 2040, but only 14 billion cubic feet per day in LNG exports. And just to put this into perspective, right now we're at about 3.5 billion cubic feet. We have 4 projects coming on in the next 2 years that'll take us to about 11 billion cubic feet. And we've approved 21 billion cubic feet. So there is an enormous amount of headroom here. And when you combine the learning that's going on in the fields in the unconventional gas space, along with the build out of these terminals, there is sufficient gas for us to send to our allies and friends over in Europe.
Other comments, Ms. Grigas? Dr. Grigas, excuse me.
So regarding, I'd like to follow up on the price issue, because the figures I have actually are different. So the DOE did a series of studies on the impact of exports on gas pricing. And the figures I have is that they anticipated gas price increases somewhere between 4 to 12%. And the conclusion of that study, not doubling, and the conclusion was that an increase in production overall should balance the market effects of exports. And in fact, that GDP growth will offset any negative effects of these gas price increases for the U.S. economy.
Thank you. Mr. Mills, and then we'll go to Senator Cassidy here. Go ahead.
Just to add a technology perspective, if I might, Madam Chairman. The interesting thing about natural gas markets is that I would say I'm on the front lines because of my involvement in a technology venture fund that's working with the shale producers and midstream folks. The cost of natural gas in the parts of the Permian these days in West Texas is negative. Which is kind of interesting. There aren't many critical commodities that are produced at high volume, and they produce tremendous quantities of it, for which, in effect, it's not leaking methane. This is natural gas that you're effectively paying somebody to take away. It's clear that that's not an aberration. That's a consequence of the nature of this particular resource. So as demand for oil, and you're an oil producer, you co-produce natural gas, and you're not interested particularly in the fact that it's not generating a profit for you. So you have this odd negative prices. The other thing is in the Marcellus, in the Pennsylvania region, the production of gas, like Alaska, is astonishing. I mean, the quantities of gas that can be produced technologically are utterly astonishing. The only question that you have as a technologist is, do the technologies around this domain getting better fast enough to keep driving the cost curve down, the cost of producing it? Every engineer I talk to on the front lines answers yes. We're not even close to an asymptote. What that reverts to is, with all due respect to my friends at DOE who make forecasts at EIA, they have consistently demonstrated an inability to understand the price dynamics in these markets. And it's not a criticism that's an insult, it's because it's very difficult. One thing we do know is the productive capacity is astonishing, which benefits American consumers. Domestic consumers will benefit from global competition on this, because LNG can't be exported unless it's cheap when it goes onto the train that liquefies it. It has to be very, very cheap. It's always going to be cheaper to buy it in America, which is why there's something like $100 billion of capital construction, of private money, building chemical processing plants and plastic plants to use cheap domestic gas. They're making these bets on the assumption that gas will be cheap in America for a very long time.
Let's go to Senator Cassidy. Thank you.